Today, I'm excited to bring you a conversation with Seth Godin, a master of disrupting conventional thinking. Our discussion will challenge you to do customer experience right in new ways. We're tackling some bold statements that Seth says, such as customer service is free, authenticity is radically overrated, and purpose is a trap. What exactly does that mean? And the link to customer loyalty? Well, you're going to hear these answers as well as the value of focusing on your existing customers versus so much on getting new sales and what you can do to retain your clients for improved results. Of course, we can't have an episode without AI because we humans need to coexist. But how do we actually thrive in this tech-enabled world? Well, Seth tells you this, and each story is better than the next. I think you're going to need to listen to this episode twice because there are just so many gems shared. Now, let's get started. Hello, Seth Godin. Welcome to the Doing CX Right show.
Thanks, Stacy. It's a pleasure.
I have to say, everything you touch turns to gold. You're an author, 21 books. Is that right? 21?
I guess. I mean, I've failed more than most people. That's one of the things I'm most proud of. It's just you don't notice those.
That's what you're proud of. I mean, really, keeping it real, that's just perfectly said by you. Founded several companies, a huge successful blog, podcast, workshops, marketing hall of fame. I mean, your accomplishments go on. And now you launch something new in the charity world, continuing to disrupt conventional thinking. First question, what are you cooking right now? Please share.
You mean for dinner? I make dosa most nights. I'm on a dosa kick, making it from scratch. Even though you can buy the batter and it's pretty good, but I don't think that's really what you were asking me. Who knows? What do you mean?
You know what? There are people that might want to know what Seth Godin eats for dinner. So absolutely, we got to keep this real. But yes, what is your newest venture? Please tell people.
Goodbids. Goodbids.org is a reinvention of charity auctions. Charities raise about $300 billion a year in this country from consumers. It's an enormous amount of work that they didn't sign up for. And the more successful a charity is, the more money they have to raise. So I come from a wonderful, lucky childhood. My parents were both active in nonprofits. I've been doing philanthropy for a long time. And I saw how much disruption the whole process causes to typical nonprofits. So what I did was I reinvented the charity auction, and we are modeling it right now so that other charities will be able to use our tool. But the short version is we auction off really cool things like a Grateful Dead guitar or Neil Armstrong Apollo 11 shoulder patch. The auction starts at $10, then $20, then $30, then $40, then $50. But you can't skip any steps. You can't jump ahead. And every bid is a non-refundable donation. So this is hard for some people to get their heads around. But what it means is that when we auctioned off an Apple Watch right now, the bidding is now up to $220, which means that the charity is going to get $2,400. And as the bidding keeps going up, it goes up even faster. So our hope is to help charities raise a lot of money. It's at goodbids.org if anyone wants to check it out.
Oh, they will. And it'll be in the show notes for people to click and go. So I have a burning question. I asked this of 126 other people so far on my show, and that is about you. If you could go back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self based on what you know now that you didn't know then, what would you say to the younger Seth Godin?
Well, there have been so many dead ends and mistakes and errors and mostly things that I didn't do that I should have done. And I wouldn't tell the young me about any of those because the mistakes made me who I am. And I am happy where I am. So the only thing I'd say is it's going to be okay. And that's what I would say to most people. Because if you define whatever happens as okay, then it's going to be okay.
Do you think people are looking for more than okay? Do we need to actually give ourselves permission to be with okay?
Well, I mean, the semantics of this are fascinating. Every single person listening to this is richer than the last king of France was. And if we can imagine living in any other period of time, we would miss how much leverage and power each of us has. We would be appalled at public health conditions, at how many children were dying in childbirth and how many civil wars were raging, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to, you can say, this is imperfect, everything's terrible. If you want to, you can say, everything is perfect, nothing could be better. But I think it's more useful to say, I'm going to define what's happening right now as what's happening right now. And isn't it great? How can I make it better? I think we can do both those things at the same time.
Both and. So this is the Doing CX Right show. I can't help but ask what does customer experience mean to you?
It begins with empathy. The fact is, nobody knows what you know. No one wants what you want. No one sees what you see. And if you expect that your customers are going to be you, you will be sadly disappointed because they're customers because they don't have everything that they need or want yet. That's why they're customers. And we have to have the empathy to imagine that they had a different bad thing happen to them yesterday and they have a different point of view and they have a different expectation, and that's okay. So empathy is where we begin. And then the second part of it is to have the generosity to be able to understand that people want to be seen and connected. They don't want a discount. A discount is the thing they'll settle for if everything else is equal. But in general, people will go out of their way and spend time, effort, and money to earn respect and dignity, to feel like they are part of something. And so customer experience says, I have to bend over backwards to help this person deal with the story in their head that might not be the story in my head. And if I can help them become the person they seek to become, they'll probably come back.
I got chills. You wrote about the fact that customer service is free. Now, I bet this is raising people's eyebrows. Please explain this statement.
Okay, so Phil Crosby wrote a book 40 years ago called Quality is Free. And what he argued was that quality, not luxury, but quality means meeting specifications. And if you can build a production facility that meets spec, all the money you invest in doing that will come back to you many times over because it's cheaper to make it right than it is to fix it. And so I took that idea and I said, customer service is free because keeping a customer is way more economically valuable than having to go get a new one. Having a delighted customer is the best marketing you could possibly have because one delighted customer will bring you new customers way cheaper than you doing outreach to strangers will. So when I combine those two things, I say, how lucky am I that a customer who's frustrated reached out? That a customer who's frustrated is giving me a chance to fix things. In that moment, it is impossible to spend too much time and impossible to spend too much money making that person happy. Because the alternative is to break trust, to lose the customer, and to have them become a negative marketing force. So what we see is that companies lacking empathy get all hung up on how can I cost reduce customer service when all they've actually done is decreased what customer service costs today and increased how much it's going to cost them in the long run.
Why then are so many companies focused on getting more sales, investing in getting more sales versus loving the ones that they have, which is what you just talked about? Is it because it's not sexy? Is it retention boring?
Well, it's a few things. First of all, we live in an era of customer entitlement. And it's, the idea that you can buy 40 outfits online, try them on and send back 39 and someone will pay the shipping. The idea that someone's standing there on one foot angry because they ordered a light pink cake and you delivered a slightly off red pink cake. They're furious at you. Well, because we live in this idea of privileged luxury. And if you're the owner of that business, it's easy to get frustrated because you're saying, look, I'm bending over backwards, but your story, this particular customer's story, is nothing will make me happy except making you unhappy. That there are people who are walking around with an oppositional mindset. The right thing to do is fire those customers, to generously and kindly send them to your competition so that you can serve the rest of your customers in a way that's useful. But that takes sophistication and nuance. And most larger organizations aren't built on that. They're built on CFOs and stock price. So the easiest thing to do is make your top line go up and decrease your costs to make your bottom line go up. But that's in a snapshot of time. And we're talking about over time. So as long as I'm ranting, I'll give you an example of firing a customer. Eugene Cates, for 40 years, ran a luxury hotel in Northern Ontario. And on Sundays, they had a buffet and they had smoked salmon on the buffet. And I was sitting there with Eugene. It was probably 1979. And someone went up for their fourth serving of smoked salmon. They were being a pig. And they were clearly weren't participating in the spirit of this lodge in the North Woods. And Eugene turned to his staff and said, that's Bob, put him on the no list. And I said, Eugene, what's the no list? And he said, anytime Bob calls for reservation going forward, I'm sorry, there's no room, we're full. Because it's just not worth having him here. It costs too much. He's not in the spirit of what we're trying to do. We'd rather serve the people we can serve beautifully than accommodate the people who need to rip us off.
Ooh, that is a brilliant example and makes so much sense. Now, when we were together yesterday, you talked about people only buy if it's worth more than it costs, and everything is a bargain or we wouldn't buy it. Can you elaborate on this, as well as you talked about how products need to be able to sell itself? Share, please.
Okay, so if you walk through most towns, there's a 99-cent store. The 99-cent store announces through its name that it's cheap. And yet there isn't a line out the door because cheap isn't what most people seek. Even in some of the poorest places in the world where I have spent time, people aren't buying the cheap one. They're buying the one that serves them. And so what we have is the opportunity to offer people what they need and want that comes with a story, and the story has to be worth more than it costs. If it's worth more than it costs, people buy it. So I give you an example that isn't happening in New York. It's happening in a little village. Water Health International shows up and they bring clean water to a town, and you can get a 5-gallon jerry can full of clean water for a nickel. And the alternative is walking for an hour, getting water from a stream that's not clean. Maybe you and your family will get diarrhea, get ill. Maybe someone's going to die. So you would think that as soon as you offer this, everyone would line up and buy it. But in fact, that's not what happens. It's not what happens because the story most people carry around in that community is, it was good enough for my parents, it's good enough for my grandparents. I don't have a water problem. I have a problem of belonging and everything else. And so what they did at Water Health was two things. First of all, they made the cans that the water comes in a different color, bright color. So everyone knows that you've just bought this thing. And the second thing they did was they brought battery-powered microscopes to classrooms. And the kids brought water in from home and looked through the microscope and showed all the other kids what was in the water that they were drinking. And so then the other kids would go home and say to their parents, hey, Marsha's getting clean water at her house. I saw it in the microscope. So now it's a status thing that you're buying when you're buying this water, not just the feature of the water, which is that it's cleaner and won't make people possibly ill. And as a result, people buy it because the status is worth way more than a nickel. And now the water is a bargain. It's not 5 cents more than going down to the stream. It's $1 less than any other way you could buy status.
You talked about Momofuku, your story. You went there. Can you share that story? I love that example.
So we were talking about the smallest viable audience, and people don't really understand it. They call it niching down. It's not niching down, it's niching up. And David Chang's super famous, very successful. My family and I used to go to his very first restaurant long before he was well known, before he was even profiled in the Times. And it was in the East Village. We would get in the Prius, drive down there for Saturday lunch, sit at the counter. And about 4 weeks in a row we went. I don't eat meat. I haven't eaten meat in 40 years. And I said to the person who was cooking at the griddle, I'd love the Brussels sprouts, but can you leave off the bacon? Because then you save money and I can eat it. And they said, fine. And the 5th time we were there, I said to the guy behind the counter, who was probably David, I'm not sure, the same thing. He said, there's a vegetarian restaurant 3 doors down. He said, everything they serve has no meat in it. We built this restaurant to make a certain kind of food for a certain kind of person. And I just don't think it's for you. Why don't you head over there next time? And I believe that was the day that David Chang became David Chang and that Momofuku became Momofuku. When you can kindly and respectfully say to someone, I'm sorry, it's not for you. That helps you be on the hook for who it is for.
I don't think enough companies do that. That's
almost none.
Almost none. AI. We know that we can't escape this conversation because it is top of mind everywhere we go. And some people are adopting it. Some people are still so fearful. So, can you share your perspective? And you talked about the solar system analogy, which I love. Please tell the audience about this view.
Well, I'm going to leave the solar system aside for a minute and just talk about AI. And then if we want to get to systems, we can.
Okay.
ChatGPT isn't as smart as it thinks it is, and it's not as smart as it looks like it is. A screwdriver, on the other hand, is exactly as smart as it appears to be. Very few people are fooled by a screwdriver or a spatula or a kitchen colander. These are useful tools.
Mm-hmm.
We know what they're for, and when we use them for what they're for, they do what they're supposed to do. And AI isn't like that. ChatGPT is arrogant. It makes mistakes. And if we don't use it properly, we will be fooled into thinking it told us the right answer when it hasn't. And so the lesson is to use it like a screwdriver, is to say, imagine a world where you're a craftsperson who doesn't have screwdrivers and all your competition does. You're going to go out of business. You need to learn how to use a screwdriver. You need to learn how to use this tool and use it for what it's good at. But you cannot cede judgment and decision-making to it, because if you do, you will look like a fool and you will fail. And so the challenge is to give it very specific, bounded questions where you can verify its work, or challenge it to criticize your work so you can listen to the criticism without shame because it wasn't a person criticizing your work, and decide what to do with it. Or challenge it to help you brainstorm. But for the foreseeable future, ChatGPT and Claude.ai, which I prefer, are much more likely to be useful as tools, not as pilots telling you what to do.
Now, the idea of systems, where does that come in? Because clearly AI and the human touch have to come together and systems are changing. So how do we coexist?
Okay, well, I've been thinking a lot about systems, so I'm hearing your question differently than I think you're asking it. What I was talking about when I was talking about the solar system is this. The solar system is a star and a bunch of planets. But that's not what makes it the solar system. What makes it the solar system is the invisible part, gravity. It doesn't matter how much Venus or Mercury wants to go somewhere else. They can't. Because this invisible thing, which if you didn't know it was there, would be a mystery, like why are the planets going like this, is the key. And there's a system that leads to higher education. There's a system that leads to the wedding industrial complex. There's a system that grew up around social media. These are systems. And you can deny that there are forces at work, but you will then end up being confused. That there's an old expression that a chicken is nothing but an egg's way of making another egg. That is the purpose of the chicken. That's it. That the genes in the egg exist to make the next egg happen. And your use of social media is nothing but social media's plan to be able to get bigger. It's a system. And it's not like, there are some crazy people who run social networks, but it's not like these crazy people are sitting there thinking about Stacy. What is going on is a system has evolved, and it involves millions and millions of other people keeping score of weird algorithms trying to outwit or play with the machine in the middle. But you are part of a system, and you have to decide which parts of the system are you going to dance with and sing with and leverage, and which parts you're going to try to change. So to give you an example, if you said, I'm going to build the best website in history and Google's going to just notice me, that might happen, but it's unlikely because the system, fueled by millions of sites doing SEO, fueled by all these algorithms, is going to do what it's going to do. You will not be able to change that system. On the other hand, within a tiny circle, you might have a lot of influence changing a system. And, so in Salt Lake City, they said a system has created a negative side effect of homelessness. And changing little tiny edges of it isn't working. Why don't we just buy houses for people who don't have them, see what happens? And that has generated really positive results. Doing it at scale is going to be very difficult because there isn't a system to pay for doing it at scale. But when you change the dynamics, the outcomes change.
I want to bring up something that sounds so jolting. Authenticity is radically overrated.
Yeah.
That's jolting. What do you mean? And how do companies build trust and deepen loyalty then?
Okay, if you think that AT&T is authentically anything, or even Patagonia, every single person at Patagonia is just like their brand, you are being very naive. We gain loyalty as corporations when we are consistent, not when we are authentic. If we are consistent, if people behave on the phone the same way they behave in the conference room, the same way they behave when no one's looking, that's consistent, right? Authentic isn't consistent. Authentic is erratic. Authentic is I'm having a bad day. Authentic is I'm cursing you out. Authentic is that person at the Avis counter who just gave you a really hard time when you were having a bad day because they felt like it. That's authentic. Please leave authenticity at home. We left authenticity at home for thousands and thousands of years. And it's only with the rise of social media and the Kardashians that this mythology that authenticity is what you're supposed to do. No, maybe with your friends you can be authentic. Maybe if your goal is to be a diva on a social network, you can be authentic. But even those people aren't. Like Madonna isn't authentically Madonna all the time. There are nights that she goes to perform a concert where she'd rather be at home in her slippers, because she's in her 60s. But she plays the role of Madonna so well.
Yeah.
People think she's authentically doing that. She's not. She's just being a character that you're used to seeing on TV.
Consistency. Oh, yes. Now, here's another jolting statement. Purpose is a trap. How can companies effectively communicate their purpose that feels genuine and fosters a stronger emotional connection?
Okay, so, my friend Simon has written about purpose. Individuals can feel like they have a purpose, and if that's a useful compass for you, go for it. But if you're spending all your time crafting some mission statement, Johnson & Johnson's purpose is to enable people to have better health around the world, blah, 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 blah. No, actually their purpose is to make the stock price go up. And they happen to make the stock price go up by making Band-Aids. But they have this complicated mission statement that they don't actually use to make hard decisions. And if you're not using your statement to make hard decisions, then it has no purpose. What we need is this useful compass to say, how are we going to get all the people we work with on the same page? Are we measuring useful proxies or false proxies? Because as soon as you measure something, people are going to game it to try to make it go up. So net promoter score. Well, net promoter score got gamed because you then get all these notes from the car dealer. Please, 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 when they call you for your net promoter score, give them a high ranking, right? Oh, and on and on and on and on and on. That's not a measure of what we're here to do. And so with all these false proxies, coming up with a mission statement, coming up with, quote, your purpose is just more noise. That what we're trying to do is invent culture. And culture, very simply, is what are things like around here? When we are the best version of our consistent selves, what are things like around here? So at Nordstrom, which, like all department stores, is on the rocks right now, but when they weren't, they established a customer experience culture like few others.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was by sharing stories, true stories, that became legendary so that people understood what it was like around here. So two I'll share with you. The first one was for a very long time, 20, 30, 40 years. If you called Nordstrom's and asked for Mr. Nordstrom, he would answer the phone. Even when they had dozens and dozens and dozens of stores, he would answer the phone. And the second one is the story of a guy walks into a Nordstrom's with 2 snow tires and goes up to the tie counter in the menswear department and says, I bought these 2 snow tires here and I don't need them anymore. And the guy at the tie counter reaches into the cash register, hands him $400 and says, thank you very much, and accepts the return. And the extraordinary thing about it is Nordstrom's doesn't sell snow tires. And the truth of the story is it happened in the Anchorage, Alaska store. And the Anchorage, Alaska store used to be a Sears. And that counter used to be the automotive department. And the person behind the counter knew all of those things, and he offered the person a refund. But the reason the story works is because his boss and his boss's boss and his boss's boss's boss all applauded it. They didn't get him in trouble. If he had gotten in trouble, it would have become Sears Roebuck. It would have become yet another, brain dead bureaucracy. But because they celebrated this, because they said, yeah, maybe we're going to have yutzes who try to rip us off by bringing us snow tires, but it's worth it. They created a culture. And it turns out it's much, much cheaper to do that than to buy a Super Bowl ad.
Huh. That's a great response. Wow. So leadership, we know that customer experience is fueled by the inside. What is the best leadership advice that you've been given in your career, or that one that you continue to tell others?
Okay, so Stacy, let's get the words right. Management and leadership aren't the same thing. Management is using power and authority to help people do their job by telling them what to do. Leadership is voluntary. There are lots of managers who never led one day in their life. Leadership says, I'm going over there, who wants to come? Leadership is the guts to do something that hasn't been done before. So most organizations don't have leaders. They just keep doing what they're doing until they go out of business. And, as someone who worked at Yahoo for a little while, I can tell you that this is not reserved for old-fashioned old companies, right? That there is a market dynamic, a system that rewards CEOs for turning the crank and turning the crank and turning the crank and turning the crank. And if the world doesn't change, they'll be fine. Leadership is Satya Nadella making a bet on AI 5 years ago that doubled the value of his company because his company didn't do any AI 5 years ago. That's leadership. And what we're thinking about when we're thinking about customer experience and leadership is we're trying to say, how am I going to build an organization, a culture where I don't have to tell people what to do, but where they decide that the accurate measures of customer experience are worth pushing up. That they figure out how to find the empathy to serve the customers we want to serve and the guts to have the customers we don't want to serve move on.
Just digesting that because it's just so eloquent. You talk about creating our own room. That's hard for small companies in a market dominated by giants. What can they do to create spaces, unique spaces that attract loyal followers?
It's easier for small businesses than big businesses, not harder, right? That if we wanted to create important change at McDonald's, at Chipotle, at name whatever Ford Motor Company, we'd have to go to 150 meetings and pilot things and have memos and everything else. Whereas a small company can do it tomorrow. And I used to talk to real estate groups, and one of the things I would say to them is, how many local groups have meetings in your office? Right? The Boy Scout troop, the Brownies, whatever it is. How often are you hosting these meetings in your office? Not trying to sell anything whatsoever. Just, I got some space, come do it. Right? How many of you not sponsor the baseball team, but issue, monthly email bulletin to everyone in town with reports on what happened at the school board meeting? How many of you are acting like the mayor of this town without being elected? Because if you do those things, you have created the conditions for the community to coalesce. And a community that is coalescing around someone will respect that person more. You're not there to sell them something. You're there to earn trust and connection. And you don't want a manual, and it's not a policy. It's a cultural choice. And so if you're busy pretending that you're a big company, you got two problems. Number one, you don't have the resources to be a big company. And number two, big companies are better at being big companies than you. So why not embrace the fact that you're a little company? I have exactly one employee, me. And so I write every word that anyone who's ever read my work has read. And if I'm showing up on a podcast, it's me, and I booked it. I'm taking advantage of that because a big company can't do any of those things. They have to spend all their time getting their act together. And that's how I can launch so much stuff, because I don't have to spend time getting my act together. I can just listen to my customers.
Oh, my heart is pumping. I love that. Final questions here, because I know we're running out of time, and I appreciate you so much. What is the one takeaway you want people to remember to actually go do?
I think our TLDR culture, which says, I don't have time for nuance and I don't have time to spend time on this, just give me a checklist item so I can go back to work, is the heart of the problem. So the one thing they need to do is listen to 119 other episodes of your podcast.
I love that. Thank you. Love that. Oh, well, where's the best place to reach you? Because I know there's going to be tons of questions that I'll do my best to field, but clearly I'm not you.
Yeah, well, as I said, I don't scale. You can't reach me, but you can read 9,000 of my blog posts if you type Seth into your favorite search engine. That's a good place to start.
That's a great place to start. And good luck and best of everything for the charity work that you're doing. And I will make sure that's very clear in the show notes, because that's huge. And as you always tell, giving of service and making that our life purpose and our life mission. And you're doing it. You're walking it. So
you're very kind. I just want to be really clear. You can be of service without it being a nonprofit. Good Bids is not a nonprofit. We're charging the nonprofits we work with if it works. But generosity doesn't mean free. And contribution doesn't have to be a cash donation. Generosity means doing difficult work to open doors for other people, whether or not you're doing it as a nonprofit or a for-profit.
Well, that is a great lesson to leave on. So thank you for being here and the gift of you. I appreciate you so much.
Thanks, Stacy. Keep making a ruckus. It matters.